And you're live.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to start sewing this week. Finally, we're going to get to start working on actual sewing for our quilt along or our sew. If you don't know what we're talking about, again, we have, and if you haven't joined yet, go onto YouTube and go onto Facebook, join our Facebook group. It's the it's the Cindy B's Sew Along 2023, and you will see pictures of blue stars on the top on the picture. That's the one that you want to be on.
And just letting you guys know, we are trying a new mic setup this week, so let us know if this is working out.
If you haven't already, do your paste up sheet for that we put out there on week 1. And I did all my paste up of my actual fabrics because from this point on, we are not going to be talking about light, darks, mediums. We are going to talk about the fabric by the letter. It'll be a little bit easier. So you can see that this week, or last week actually, we were supposed to cut fabric A, B, and C. So when we go on to our paper, it's fabric A, fabric B, fabric C. We know exactly which ones we want, which is really important if you've changed your colors around, because some people want, instead of the light, they're switching up the light and the darks. So this way, it'll keep everybody on the same page. So I hope you've already downloaded your cutting instructions for this week, and we are going to be doing what we call a log cabin unit. It is just in here. It is this little unit right here. We will not be sewing full blocks every week like we did last week. We want to show you, last year. We want to show you that taking this quilt that looks kind of difficult, all these stars, all these points, if we break them down into units, it makes it much more doable, much more relaxing. We only have little bits that we have to do every week, and this is going to be exciting. Okay, so before we start sewing, I've wanted to just go over a few of the tools that we need for this week, and also for probably using them continually for the rest of the project. First off, our thread. I love the Aurifil thread, the 50 weight. It's very nice and fine, low lint. So that is my preferred thread for piecing. Normally, I either use a light gray or a beige, and I would on this quilt as well probably use the gray. However, today I'm using the darker gray just so you can see it a little bit better, hopefully on camera. So I have to put that in my machine, and then I'll continue on going over the tools that we need as I'm threading my machine. We're also going to need this week some little ruler that can measure at least 3 inches. Of course, if we're going to sew, we're going to have to unsew. So I have my seam ripper handy, my little thread snips, and my purple Thang for pushing and pulling. Our pieces this week are kind of small. So there's 2 things that we're going to do. We're either going to pin, and I love the Clover pins, or we are going to use this SeamAlign Glue by Acorn Precision Piecing products. That's what I'm going to use today because it makes things so nice. It's going to hold them nice and tight so they don't slide. And it just disappears. Our needle's not going to get gummed up. It's not going to do anything like that. So I'm going to keep that nice and handy so we can use that. I've also taken in my machine and I've made sure that I have a new needle. Because I'm using a nice light 50 weight thread, I like to use a 70-10 needle. Or you could use the regular 80. You don't have to use the more expensive needles. We're just piecing. We're just sewing 2 layers together. So a regular universal needle will do.
Nelda says hi. She ran home from work for this.
Oh, awesome. Hi, Nelda. I have my 1/4 inch foot on my machine. And I have a single hole, single stitch plate. I put that on there because again, we're using little pieces. It's not going to push my corners in. If you don't have it, just use the regular plate that comes with your sewing machine. I'm going to take for sure this time, and I'm going to reduce my stitches down from a 2.5 down to a 2. Really important for all my piecing, but especially when I'm using small pieces, because it is going to make sure that those seams don't open up. Alrighty. So where's everybody from today? It's nice to see you. The sun is shining bright. I hope our internet is good today. We checked out what they're streaming with through Bell, and we're hoping it's going to do okay. So onto my cutting instructions. It told me from those strips that we cut last week, we're cutting B's, which are our background fabric, and C. I want to place them on my board the way they are laid out on the paper, because I want to make sure that my blocks always spin in the same direction. I don't want to have one going one way and one going the other way. It's not going to make a big difference at the end of the day. It's a little bit maybe my mathematical brain, but I do want all my blocks to be identical. So we're calling this a log cabin block because of the way it starts. We're going to start with this center block and then a background and add another background to it. If it was a regular log cabin block, we would be adding more strips all the way around. Why did you ask? Did we not sew these two strips together and then cut them? Why did we cut all our pieces exactly like this? Here's my theory. When you sew pieces together and cut them and then sew another piece on it, on a strip, and then cut them, your whole block can start getting topsy-turvy and get twisted a little bit. This way is going to do two things. It's going to keep our seams nice and straight. I don't know that it saves a lot of time because we do have to cut our pieces anyways. But we are going to be working on our 1/4 inch seam with this block. And this is why we started with this one. So I hope you went and looked at the video and you tested your seam. So now we're going to put that into practice. So the first thing that I am going to sew are these two blocks together.
We have a hello from Petawawa and 2 hellos from Manitoulin.
Ooh, hi. I have a little piece of scrap paper here, or sorry, scrap fabric. Do you want to get in there, Tiff? A little bit closer. Again, when I'm sewing with little pieces, my little fat fingers get in there kind of hard. Sometimes it's hard to hold. Sometimes it'll want to pull our threads down into our machine. So I like to start with, some people call them beginners and enders. Some people call them pigs. It's just a little strap piece of fabric, and I am going to start sewing. So this will do two things. It will hold my threads out of the way, so it's not going to make that rat's nest in the bottom. And we're going to actually end up using less thread at the end of the day, which is always good. I like to sew with my needle in the down position. And I have a 1/4 inch foot on here.
Oh my goodness. Hello from West Tennessee.
Well, hello there. I love sewing with my needle in the down position. I know you probably can't see it, but my machine is getting a little bit older. It probably has to go in for a service. My needle is not in the exact perfect center of my foot. When I did my test, and I did take those 3 1.5 inch strips, sew them together, I found that I'm just going to move my foot up, my needle up. I had to move my needle over to.
You're on your straight stitch
Oh, I'm
plate,
my
you
straight
can't.
stitch plate. I can't. Okay. So now that I changed it, man.
Cindy, that'll break your scissors.
No, it won't. No, it won't. I'm taking my straight stitch plate off because I found that my sewing machine is off a little bit. I have it worked out for my service rep. She's going to be fixing it hopefully next week. And then we should be able to test it again. Here's a nice point. Another tip for you today. if you ever bring your machine in for servicing, retest your 1/4 inch seam, because if it was ever out like mine is right now, your service tech will put it back to where it's supposed to be. So now your seams are going to be off a little bit. So I have to sew at a 0.3. So I've moved my needle just a notch over to the right, and that's going to be my perfect seam. And this is going to be testing it out, and I'll show you how. So I'm going to sew to the end of my little leader, and I'm
hello from Oregon.
Oregon too. Wow, exciting. Needle down. I'm ready to go. I love to chain piece. It saves thread. It saves time. It's really quite fun. So I'm going to take my pieces off of my board and put them right sides together. Oh, here's a question that always comes up. Because I'm using batik, how can you tell what side is the right side or wrong side? Whichever side that you want to use is the side that's going to be the right side. Sometimes some batiks are a little brighter on one side than they are on the other, but both work equally well. If you do get one mixed up in your quilt, it's not going to matter. No one's ever going to be able to go over there and say, oh, look, that piece is upside down. So I'm going to sew my perfect 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to stop at the end with the needle down. My foot can come up, and I can take my second piece, line them up. If you're having issues with holding it, here is where this glue is going to come into effect. I am going to take my SeamAlign glue, and I'm going to put 3 tiny wee little dots. I'm going to put my fabric on top, aligning it up perfectly, and I'm just going to tap it with the iron and dry that glue. It is held, so it's not going to slide. So now I can just slap that right back into my sewing machine. I have my purple thing. I want to make sure that that stays nice and straight. I'm going to guide it with this finger along my edge of my foot because I want that to stay as straight as I can, because sewing machines want to throw it onto the side. I am going to do 4 of these because it's enough for 1 block. I like to make 1 block first and then decide if it's correct, and then I can continue on with the rest of my blocks. Yes, Tiff?
Why don't you check your first one?
I could check my first one.
Cindy, that is not an ironing board.
It's paper. It's actually wouldn't hurt. Just enough to dry. Just
not
no, this is not plastic.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the yeah, no, it's if that was a cutting board, yes, Tiffany, you are correct. Do not ever iron on your cutting board.
I thought they just had plastic backings.
No, they're not plastic backings. Okay, so she wants me to check my first one. She doesn't trust me. So I'm just going to cut that off. I'm going to leave these in the machine, so it's going to hold on there. I'm going to press a little bit more this time, so I will use the mat. I want to press away from my center square. So in this case, it's going to be towards my background fabric, my B. So I want to have that up. I am going to set my seam, and this helps embed those threads right into the fabric. I am going to open it up with my fingers. I want to make sure that I cannot see my stitches, but I want to make sure also that I don't have any fold over. I want it to be open as far as I can, and I'm going to give it a press. I don't want to press an iron. I don't want to catch it with my tip of my iron because I could stretch my seam. So here's the moment of truth. When I sew 2 1 3/4 inch squares together, it should measure exactly 3 inches. So let's test the theory. I'm lining this up here. I've got it exactly on the edge of my block. You could put that board there if you. That might help get a, there's a shadow on the
There's
ruler.
a glare from the light.
Okay, so you can see I'm on the side here. My 3-inch line is exactly on my unit. So I can stand here and I can test every single one, but I have a better way. So I have 1, 2, 3. Let me do one more. And it doesn't hurt to test a couple blocks. I want to make sure that all my sides are lined up really nicely. Just going to hit that with an iron to dry my glue. I'm going to do one more. I can take that little piece of fabric, I can put it back in. So now it's going to hold my threads. So I'm ready to sew next time. And then I have my other units here that I am going to press open. Now, just because my first unit was perfect, doesn't mean that my other ones. Now, I know because I'm on camera, I'm trying a little bit.
Ironed in the wrong direction.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Tiffany.
You're welcome.
So, I know I'm trying extra hard because I'm on camera, so everything is going to be perfect. But that doesn't mean it's going to be at the end of the day. Again, pressing towards my background. Background's up. It's a little awkward with the iron. Here's another little tip for you. I usually sew all my units together and I have my ironing board placed away. So I will sew all my units and then I will go and press them. And that makes me get up and actually go for a little walk in between sewing so my back doesn't get so sore. Just for today, though, we're going to use it this way. So now I have all my units that are sewn. These are for my next block. I'm just going to put those to the side. And I want to sew these units to these units. Two things. I want to make sure that they're all going to be spinning in the same direction. So I always want to place it like this. I am going to leave my full piece on the bottom, put my pieced piece on the top, because now I can see my seam and I can make sure that it's not going to get flipped in the wrong direction. Now, how do I know that this unit is exactly 3 inches? Because we have already cut these units to 3 inches. So if I place this on my block and it doesn't fit exactly, that means my seam is wrong. So if this piece was too big, that means my seam would be too big. So at this point right now, I can undo that teeny tiny little seam, resew it with that perfect 1/4 inch, and continue on with this unit. If I wait till the end and sewed all my blocks together, then all of a sudden, if my seam was wrong, I have to unsew lots. Depending on your quilt, you can be unsewing a considerable amount of units. So that's why I love the log cabin for us to perfect our 1/4 inch seam, because we have built-in markers that we know whether or not our seam is too big or too small. If this unit was too big, that means my seam's too small. I don't have to unpick it, but I have to take a better seam so the units fit together. All right. So just to get myself orientated properly, I am going to, I've got this mixed up now.
You're going to recheck your paper.
I am going to recheck my paper, and they are going to be exactly like that. So it's okay to turn your paper sideways if you have to. So now that I've reoriented my block, all I have to do is take my one from my right side, flip it over like a book, close it like a book to my left. And I am going to make sure that that seam matches. If that seam doesn't match, here's where we're going to have to either resew or unsew. We can still use our wonderful glue. Give that a little press with the iron, and off we go. So I'm going to go sew to the end of my leader, needle down, foot up. This foff that I'm using, the foot comes up automatically, so I can butt right up against my needle. If yours doesn't do that, just lift your foot a little bit and butt your fabric right up to your needle, aligning it with whatever edge of the foot or tape or whatever you've decided to use. Now I can see my seam. Sometimes where the seam is, it wants to push over too far. I am double checking, making sure that's totally all aligned, and I'm off to the races. If you don't have the SeamAlign glue, just use some pins. Again, I am going to check here, Tiff. That works. I want to make sure that they're the same length. They are. So I can use pins instead. I love the Clover pins. They're nice and sharp and thin, so they don't distort my seams. I can put 2, I can put 3. And off I go. I'm going to make sure that my fabric doesn't push forward. I do not want the bulk of my fabric pushing past, so this block becomes bigger than the bottom one. I want to make sure that those edges stay totally lined up. Again, I can check. I've got a little bit of bulk there, so that means this end of my seam is a little small. I think I'm okay with this one. I can feed that in with my sewing machine. Lining up my edge. Again, I'm not ever letting the fabric slide through my fingers. I'm holding it exactly where I want it to be. I don't want to sew over top of the needle, so I am going to take that out. And one more. This one lines up absolutely perfect. Again, I can put the needle in, or I'm sorry, I can put the pin in, or I can use the SeamAlign glue. Now, if this was a regular or a different log cabin block, you would just continue on logs all the way around. But this is all we need for this block. I think our video is short and sweet today. Is there any questions, Tiffany, while we're going to do this?
No questions so far.
No questions? This one's pretty simple. Just getting us going, getting us into the groove here. Next week, we're going to have to do a little bit more. Again, I want to press my seam away from the center, which ends up being towards the full strip. When you're trying to press seams, we do want to reduce bulk, so it's automatically going to want to go that way. So life is good. So again, we're going to set that seam, going to embed it into our fabric. I am going to open it with my fingers and give it a press. Give it a press. Oh, I really got that one, didn't I? Caught the edge on that. Background up. So there is enough for one block. Let's make sure they're where we're going to be. This square has to measure 3 inches by 3 inches. So I've got the 3 inch by 3 inch. I have no fabric out there. Life is good. If it doesn't,
don't trim it.
don't trim it. That's right. Yeah, like people say, take your unit and square it up to the square that it's supposed to be. Your pieces are going to not quite fit together right. Your seams are going to be misaligned. Your little block may end up being way smaller than what it is on some than it is on the other. If this does not measure 3 by 3, re-sew your seam. It's either going to be too big or it's going to be too small. If that doesn't work, double check your measurement of the piece that you sewed onto it and make sure that that was the right measurement that your pattern calls for. Because sometimes, we maybe not quite, we miss one.
Maybe we accidentally cut at 1.5 instead of 1 3/4.
When I was lining up my squares, I had one square at 1 3/4 by 2. But because I was lining them all up, I caught it at that point. So yes, so if your block does not measure 3 by 3, check your seam and either make a smaller seam or a bigger seam, however you have to make the block work out to the right measurement. So if you are doing the lap size quilt, you need to make 8 of these units. The double needs 24 and the queen needs 36. So at the end of this session, you should have had lots of practice with your 1/4-inch seam. And it's going to be so much easier when we go to do some of the little bit more involved blocks.
Next week, it's going to be pretty important.
Yeah. So is there any questions whatsoever? Because I think, like I said, short and sweet, pretty straightforward.
No questions.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today. And next week, we will be back again with our next unit. Again, that's why we call them units. We're not doing blocks. We're going to be doing units. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all my blocks and I'm either going to clip them together. Or sorry, I'm going to take all my units and I'm going to clip them together. I can put a little note on them if I have to and say that they're my log cabin units. And I'm going to put them in my my box with the rest of my fabric for when I need them. You can also put them in a little plastic bag if that's the method that you like to do. Sandwich bags are wonderful for that. Okay, so I've got, because I'm only doing the lap size, I have 4 more blocks to do. So I'm going to continue on sewing my blocks and then I will see you next Monday. Happy sewing, everybody.